let's get into All Access. Did you see the trailer?
I did, yeah.
So they announced the premiere date, March 29th. So it'll actually be several weeks after Power Slap ends. This will be after a live Dynamite from St. Louis, which will, I guess, have the Adam Cole match on it. And the trailer, it feels as though it's going to be a mix of real and worked stories.
Very curious to know what you considered real and what you considered worked story.
Well, I can tell you that being there present for MJF storming into the press conference and cutting a promo, that was very much worked. And I almost, seeing that clip, it was almost like, it kind of does tell you like what this is going to be.
Yeah, as much as you could tell maybe from them, including that clip, but
the Adam Cole stuff, like that seems like it's going to be really well done in terms of
the very first clip we see is a Britt Baker talking about how with Thunder Rosa being champion, there aren't as many storylines going around, and I thought that was a very deliberate clip to tell the audience that this is going to be a shoot. Okay, we're talking about storylines, and I mean, it could very well. I'm always curious to see how like kayfabe is kind of presented in these sort of like mainstream things, especially on a show like this that I'm assuming AEW wrestling is going to make reference to. Like they're definitely going to use this TV show to build two stories in their wrestling matches. At least I think. What gave me pause watching this was seeing what Ruby Soho and Ty Conti having an argument about, this better not happen again, referring to the nose break, of course. And that sort of thing, like I saw bits and pieces of it in like the Cody Rhodes, Rhodes to the Top, where like, I think they tried to fabricate, like it felt very acted out,
And your wrestling audience has a really good detection meter on that stuff. And I think if you're going to be doing that sort of stuff, that just, it's going to contradict whatever you're trying to get across as real. And I just think this is a golden opportunity with this show to do something cool. And I just, like, I'm not necessarily expecting Drive to Survive. And that certainly has its inconsistencies and certainly calling into question the reality of it for sure. Like that's going to exist in all of these reality shows. But the idea is hopefully your audience buys in. It's no different than pro wrestling.
I suppose you and I have to like. So yeah. By the way, we reviewed the first 3 episodes of Drive to Survive with Chris Elliott. That's on the free feed actually. If you guys want to check that out, we will be reviewing that every single week for the month of March. But in talking about Drive to Survive, I think you and I were very much coming at it from the perspective of a very casual fan, where Chris, coming from the perspective of a more hardcore fan. Let's remember, I don't think this show is made for us. I think the show might appeal to some of us, but I think it's largely made for the person who hasn't been watching AEW week to week, the person who doesn't follow, backstage news and might not necessarily know whether or not Ty Conti and Ruby Soho might be acting, in a scene like that.
But who's largely going to be watching this immediately after Dynamite?
Well, sure. Yeah. And that's where I almost even question putting this at 10 o'clock, but it also makes sense. Like you want to piggyback off of the AEW audience.
You do. But one of the things about, especially the early seasons of Total Divas Total Bellas. What was first? Total Divas was first.
Divas, yeah.
Like when that launched, it's on a separate network, on a separate night, and it catered to a separate audience. Like there was a lot higher of a female audience watching that show, especially in the early days in 2013 for the early seasons. And you could look at the positives and negatives. Like, would that show have done better immediately following Raw? Yeah, it probably would have. But being put on a different network like E that has a very different audience skew, they did tap into something a lot different. And this one, like you are putting it in a position where you want your diehard AEW audience to be watching a third hour on Wednesday nights.
Sure, yeah. Ultimately, I think they just want to get as many people to watch as possible. And I think the best chance of that, at least to start, is to put it after AEW, in the Power Slap slot. And if a person happens to be scrolling around and catches this when, the regular wrestling doesn't really catch their attention, then I think all the better. Hopefully this is a show that gets enough buzz that might, generate other time slots or subsequent viewings from people that aren't watching Dynamite. Yeah, it's interesting, and I think it's a great attempt. again, like you and I might kind of criticize like what might feel real and what might not fake, and that might turn us off in the way that like that stuff might turn Chris Elliott off from Drive to Survive a lot more than you and I. But I also try to remember that like ultimately all reality shows have some deal of fiction attached to them, and in the end, do they tell the stories? Do they convey the personalities? Is it entertaining? I think that's the ultimate barometer of success.
Yeah. I'm curious to watch the first episode, and it doesn't have to be the barrier for success does not have to be Drive to Survive that is this transformative event for the entire industry. It has to be a show that gets enough of an audience that is additional television revenue from Warner Brothers, that this is considered a show that we want to have on our network that makes AEW that much more valuable, that here is another hour of programming of you being in business with us and commanding a higher rights fee. That is a success of this show, and not necessarily having to completely transform their company.
Yeah. At the same time, I think they're investing a lot. It seems like in people like Adam Cole and Britt Baker, as like sort of the two of the faces of this series. It seems like Sammy Guevara, Ty Conti, another, maybe Eddie Kingston as well. There was a clip at the end that had the Bucks with Kenny Omega speaking, I guess, with Tony Khan in the same room talking about. The clip was Matt talking about how he's no good at this political stuff, and I think the insinuation was that they might have been talking about All Out, or at least the CM Punk thing.
That's what they want you to tune in, expecting to hear them address, for sure.
Right. So that'll be the expectation.
Yeah. So March 29th, which is WrestleMania week, actually. That's going to be a very busy week. So tack on another hour on Wednesday night.